Welcome back to the FYBS podcast, Big Feelings, Real Caregiving from Toddlers to Teens. I'm Dr. Jess Kozlowski, and here with Dr. Sandy Shafulia. Our focus today is big feelings can happen anywhere. And today, we're shining the light on all caregivers.
That's right. We talked about it a little bit in our last episode, but it's important that we dive in. We know that big feelings can happen in families all the
Of course.
time, but they also happen at soccer practice, in classrooms, at grandma's house, and all of those adults matter.
Absolutely. And so, just as a reminder, the structure of our podcast is 3 big ideas, 2 questions from the audience, and 1 takeaway to feel your best self.
Mhm.
Let's dive
Let's
in.
go.
All right. So, our first idea today is that the village has a vocabulary problem and why shared language changes kids' outcomes. And so, when we say village, we mean all the caretakers in children's lives.
Mhm.
When we're talking,
Everybody they interact with.
you got it.
Mhm.
And when we say vocabulary, we're really talking about emotional vocabulary and expectations that we convey to kids.
Mhm.
But when adults are using different emotional frameworks or different vocabulary, kids spend a lot of their time translating rather than learning skills.
Yeah. Let's use an example. Like something I wasn't great at was maybe auto repair class,
Okay.
right? Imagine you're learning a new skill. And every time you show up to class, the teacher uses different terms to describe the car parts and the repair steps.
Well, that's confusing.
Yeah, my dad kind of did that to me growing up for sure. Like, bring me
Great.
the thingy. Like,
Yeah.
how am I supposed to know what that is? Right? Bring me the thingy, Sandy. You spend all your time trying to figure out what car part they're talking about, for sure. And that same kid confusion that we experienced in auto
Yeah,
repair or with my dad happens with emotion frameworks.
definitely. This happens in schools, especially if the school hasn't created shared language. And so teachers are on their own to figure out their
Hmm.
favorite framework or program to use. And we're happy that folks are teaching those
Oh, sure.
skills.
Yeah.
But the problem is that it takes the first 2 months of the school year for the kids to learn the new language or the approach. Or even within the same school year, as kids go to a different classroom or interventionist room, there's a new approach being used. And so there's
Hmm.
so much language to navigate and code switching to do for kids.
Yeah. I think when I worked as a school psychologist, I was in a bunch of different schools at different times. And I definitely saw it. And I probably was even guilty about doing it with the kids that really needed the most support because the stuff that we were talking
Yes.
about in my office, well, sometimes that language didn't always translate back to the classroom or outside of school. And maybe I should have been paying a bit more attention to that to understand that when we keep trying new things to see what sticks and we don't build consistency over time or settings, it's really hard to get anything to sink in.
Yeah. Yeah, and we're doing it out of, trying to support the kid, but sometimes we're throwing too many
Too many
things.
things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so the research says that using consistent language does lead to quicker learning. New data on SEL skills is
Social emotional.
social
Yeah.
emotional learning just came out, and 77% of teachers and principals are saying that emotion regulation should be taught in schools.
Okay.
That was Edweek did that survey. And then Castle just did an analysis of portrait of the graduate statements. These
Okay.
are statements that districts create of, what is their ideal graduate? What are they shaping um, students towards? And adaptability was one of the most frequently named skills across these 272 different statements. So
Wow.
districts are really thinking about creating students that can be adaptable and, of course, in this, rapidly evolving society.
So
Yes.
everybody believes basically emotion is important,
Yes,
right? But
absolutely.
we really need to kind of dive into defining what it means. And so what I again love about Feel Your Best Self, it's one option for building a shared language. And specifically because we built it to be flexible across ages and settings. We take it home, we bring it to school, we take it to soccer from toddlers to teens.
Great.
So that's a great wrap, I think, for idea one. And that is that the emotion vocabulary that we need has to go across the whole village. Okay. So the second thing I'm thinking about, you want to hear what I
Yes,
got?
please.
Okay. I've been thinking more about what happens when those emotion playbooks aren't consistent.
Mm,
So, we're all socialized, we grow up with different norms, right?
yes.
Different emotional norms. And what happens when they're not clear or aligned with each other? So it's
Hmm,
not just about vocabulary words per se,
right.
but everything. So say, for example, you're going to a ceremony of a religion that you don't practice.
Mm,
You spend a lot of time like looking around,
around.
looking for the cues,
Yep.
trying to read others' language about what's happening and what you're supposed to do.
Mhm.
Um, I got married in a Greek church, and so my Greek wedding would be an example of that, where everything is done in triplicate in Greek
Yes.
3 times. So everything is 3 times in Greek, and so we actually had a program that was involved so that you could kind of understand what each
Follow along.
portion of that ceremony meant, and that was helpful to for people that had never been to a wedding like that before.
The same thing happens with emotional norms.
Hmm.
Mosquito and colleagues have published quite a bit about this to say that Western frameworks treat emotions as within a person,
Hmm.
but other cultures treat them as between people.
Within a person or between people. Those are really 2 totally different ways of thinking about emotions, right? And I think that the models that they use are kind of is this conversation about mine versus ours,
Exactly.
right? So in Western cultures like ours and
Yeah.
what we grew up in, we teach kids and we're talking about teaching kids to recognize, label, and accept emotions. But in other cultures, kids might be taught to adjust emotions to the demands of the situation or to seek group consensus about the meaning of a situation versus how we think in for ourselves.
Yeah, and those are very different expectations.
Okay.
So imagine being a kid who's grown up learning that emotions are happening between people,
Hmm.
and then you go to school in a US school where the teacher's asking you to explain how you're feeling internally.
Okay, that could be really confusing. Um, and I think we've also seen examples of how emotions are it also showing up in how emotions are displayed and interpreted. So, let's look at anger as an example, right? Anger could be a really valued emotion, like defending one's honor,
Mhm.
right?
For sure.
Or it could be considered childish as it
Yes.
harms relational harmony,
Yeah.
right? We do a lot of in Mediterranean cultures, examples of being very loud and boisterous, but that doesn't always translate well to other settings.
Mhm. And so no wonder some kids are confused when a coach or teacher scolds them for expressing their frustration towards another kid that just teased them.
Hmm.
You know, this also shows up in our language. So I learned Spanish as a second language,
Yep.
and I had always been taught that miedo means fear.
Okay.
And, that was the translation in school. That was the translation I operated with. And only recently did I learn that miedo also includes a feeling of aloneness along with that fear.
Oh wow, I don't think I knew that either. So is it because we don't include a feeling of aloneness in how we conceptualize fear?
I think so. I think it's that the English version of this word,
Okay.
we don't have um, aloneness as part of the fear. And so it's literally left out
Out
of
of the
that translation.
Huh. So you're saying that kids can have different definitions or sensations that could be associated with
Yes.
the same emotion words. Wow. So if you step back, that has like mind blowing, right? Like
Very
lots
big.
of implications for kids in classrooms and after school programs, sports and beyond. And so what are we supposed to do with that as the adult?
I would say show curiosity about what kids are saying and meaning and what those emotions might um, represent for them. Give space for varied expressions and work with kids to identify the skills that help them the most. If we're able to draw on a
Mhm.
toolkit that has lots of different options to match everyone's preferences and what's familiar, we'll be able to find something that works for everyone. And so, again, feel your best self being a great option to offer that variety and range of skills that kids can choose from.
Or at least start conversations about it for sure, right?
Absolutely.
And building that language. Um, I think that's a good wrap on idea too, how different emotion playbooks can create confusion rather than the confidence we're really striving for. What's on deck for idea 3, Jess?
Yeah. So for idea 3 today, I was thinking to talk about how do we maintain group expectations while still supporting individual variability. And I think this comes up a lot for coaches and folks, outside of that parenting role.
I would say that's actually one of the most frequent things we get asked about when we work with educators
Yes.
now, right, Jess? It's always a question that's brought up in our presentations or after a meeting. They say something like, "Hey, yeah, all this stuff that you've just talked to us about is great, but how do I maintain group expectations while also addressing individual child needs?"
Yeah. I definitely experienced this one as a teacher and now as a coach. So you've got 25 kids in a
Mhm.
classroom, one teacher, and a kid is having a tough time, or a coach with 12 kids ready to practice and one's falling apart. So, do you stop everything and help that one kid? What about the rest of the kids? And so, again, that dilemma, how do we hold high expectations while also still supporting the development across a range of developmental needs?
Okay. So for me, it's definitely tricky, but I always try and come back to this word called scaffolding. So it's like holding high expectations and sharing those expectations, but also providing the right match supports to help kids
Yes.
meet those expectations. So, one of the positions that I had worked in was an alternative program for kids who were struggling in their typical classrooms, and that we had lots of different ages and grades and
Okay.
in this particular setting, and each kid because of that had different goals, and so a lot of the conversations were about, like, let's not worry about what's fair or what so and so is doing or so and so else is doing. Let's worry about what is your goal.
Mm,
For
yes.
one kid, it was maybe to transition back to their regular high school setting, but for another, maybe that wasn't the goal. And so just being really clear
Yeah.
and working together and setting what those expectations and goal are, but then giving different kinds of supports help kids, I think, understand a little bit more about why we were why were they seeing things weren't exactly the same for everyone?
Sure. I love that. We're all working on different things and
Mhm.
therefore have different goals. And so I would say to that teacher or that coach, if the behavior is not unsafe, it might look like telling that one child, you're gonna circle back with them in a minute and getting everyone else started or settled, and then providing some one-on-one support. It might look like holding the same expectation for all.
Mhm.
For example, that could be, I expect that everyone's gonna speak kindly to one another.
Yep.
But then providing scripts or extra practice to those having difficulty with the skill to again give them that scaffolding or support they need to achieve that expectation.
Scaffolding. So let's tie that together with our previous idea. What does all of that look like, though, when kids are raised with different emotional norms?
Yeah, tricky. So I think, it's important to realize that not all code switching is bad. Adults navigate this across many different social expectations.
All the time.
Yeah. So, we probably behave and show different emotional displays in an important meeting versus in our kitchen with our family. And so it's good for kids to have practice navigating those norms.
Yep.
But common language takes away the need to translate while learning for
Okay.
kids. And so that can be the
So
through line.
if you've had those conversations and you've built what do we actually mean by anger? That was our
Right.
example from before. In Feel Your Best Self, we have tried to make that common language more simple, and we've talked about this to use across different ages and settings. Our stormy cloud, and what does that feel like in your body
Hmm.
or look like in a picture? Using really simple language, that can grow with you. Maybe you're starting with sad and mad, or maybe you're starting with no words,
Sure.
right? And then you move into like sad and mad. And then over time, you're expanding and building your vocabulary to show how that stormy cloud might be associated with worried,
Mm.
disappointed, jealous, scared, angry, embarrassed, all those
Yeah, more
great
nuanced.
stormy words, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and I bring us back to the car repair analogy that you started us off with. Different cars are going to need different repair techniques, but if we use the same names for all of the car parts, we're going to be able to learn those varied techniques much more quickly. And so again, a common language for emotions and behavior makes it easier to regulate and adapt across settings.
Love that. So idea 3 is about what the adult's job, what the caregiver's job is around expectations, around staying open and curious and communicating those high expectations, but giving them the supports that are best matched to help them meet those needs. Should we go to those 2 questions from the audience?
Let's do it.
All right, let me see. I got our first one. I'm a basketball coach for first graders. What do I do when a kid bursts into tears after a missed shot? What am I supposed to say?
Hmm. So let's acknowledge or validate first. That one hurt. You don't need to rush to fix it. Also, don't want to dismiss it
Okay.
and probably come back to it after the moment has passed. I found with this age that sharing a childhood experience of my own can sometimes help them through it. So that might sound like when I was a kid, I would get really frustrated when I missed a shot. But my dad told me that every missed shot was proof that I was trying. And I finally got one in, and that felt amazing. I want you to keep taking those shots.
Hmm, that's pretty cool. For me, I'm thinking about Mina, one of our puppet
Mm,
friends, right? And we talk about the shake out the yuck steps, for example, where we are either going to move it or lose it, right? So what does Mina do? And what we can do as adults. So Mina is a big basketball player, right?
yes.
As you know, and Mina uh, works on a shot,
Yep.
and has to keep practicing and practicing. And when Mina's feeling too tight, we got to shake it out a little bit. We move it
Hmm.
or we lose it. And so in the Feel Your Best Self episodes, our puppet friends are about normalizing, hey, Mina, that feeling is just an experience. And you give them a language to describe what's going on, like a disappointment when things don't go as planned. And it's okay that
Yeah,
that shot didn't go in. So, it's a balance of not letting the kids' high expectations for themselves get in the way of trying again. We're going to shake it off and try again as we grow and learn.
I love that. Ready for our next question?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay. This question comes from the audience. My mom watches my kids after school and does things differently than I do. She tells my kids to stop crying and to toughen up. How do I talk to her about this without starting a family war?
Ooh,
Yeah.
that's a good one. Um, okay. So let's maybe start with a reframe. Let's reframe and start by saying that identifying our perspective that there's a shared love for your child, right? And
Absolutely.
gratitude for watching your kids. And then maybe start to introduce the language that you use with your kids. Love the feelings forecast on the fridge strategy,
Hmm.
right? So put some of the visuals or the words that you use around the house as a starting place.
Yeah. I think also if you've noticed carryover from her approach, so maybe one of your kids is telling the other kid to toughen up, you could share that with her too, just for some perspective taking.
Hmm.
And don't expect it to change overnight. You're going to need to give her some time to process the information. And while still reminding yourself that she wants the best for your children and is using the skills she has. And so now the goal would be to offer her additional skills in a non critical way.
Non-critical perspective taking. I love that one. So
Yeah,
shifting your perspective, turning our dial, in other words,
you got
in a
it.
in a feel your best self language way. So what do you think?
I think let's wrap it up. One takeaway to feel your best self. For me, we're going to call it the one sentence rule. I want you to pick one phrase and say it to yourself each time you encounter a challenging situation with kids or maybe even adults.
Okay, so what's your one phrase going to be?
Hmm. Um, this week, I think it's they're doing the best they can with what they have.
Hmm.
A reminder to myself that there's often more than meets the eye and to offer others grace. How about you?
Hmm. Well, I love that. They're doing the best they can with what they have, but I like that one. But I can't steal that one, I guess. So I'll go back to our main message and how confusing it can be when we use different words and ways to describe feelings. So I think my takeaway is about keeping it simple. How do we keep it simple? And really using that feelings forecast, leaning into it to just understand and recognize where I am in the clouds, just the
Mm,
clouds. Am I stormy, so or sunny? What
Love
do you
that.
think? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. So to close up for today, big feelings don't respect school hours, practice schedules, or changes in caregivers.
But the adults who do show up with the shared playbook, they can change the story.
So keep showing up. That's the whole thing. We'll see
See
you
you
next
next time on
on
the
the
FYBS
FYBS playbook.
playbook.
Every day you feel a million things, but I promise that it all will be okay. I'll think of you and what you do, you will find your way. Feel your best self.